Hello, this is Keith Dawn at the back. Today's tutorial is going to be about, have you ever wondered how you could find duplicates in your data using Excel formulas? Well, if you've ever wondered that, today is the day to learn that. And I'm going to show you three different options to do that. So the first option is using the formula COUNTIFS. And how we're going to determine if those duplicates is we're going to check if the same employee and the same course and the same date exists in this data set that we have here. Okay, so in other words, in order for us to determine if it's a duplicate, then these three columns have to be an exact same value in the rows. Okay, so let's go over to the right here and see how this works. Excel only counts a row when all criteria match the same row. So how many rows match with this exact three-column combination? So Excel returns the number of rows where column B, which is employee ID, equals this value here, and column D, which is the training course, equals this value right here, and column E, which is the completion date, equals the value here. In other words, the employee ID here in this row, in row 9, and content marketing A28. If this exists in any single row here, that means that there's a duplicate. So that's what this formula right here does. It determines, we're going to select the range. We're going to select every row in column B here in our data range. And we're going to check to see if it equals E1833. Then it goes on to the second argument, does the same thing or the same process, and determines whether or not content marketing also exists somewhere in this range. And then we go on to the final column, which is the completion date. We also check to see if A28 exists in column B. If every single one of those conditions equal true, then we're going to find duplicates. So that's what this formula does. What I did was I just copied it down here. As you can see, the ranges are fixed, basically. And the values that we're trying to check against this particular range is going to be relative because we want to check every single row. So how do we determine if this is working? So let's go over to our data range. Control-Shift-L turns on our filters, and we're going to determine whether or not we're going to use the first row example. So we want to filter this employee ID, which is E1833. So we selected that. So we selected that. Remember the date, the training course, it already filtered down the content marketing and also filtered A28. As you can see, that three rows in this data set have the exact same values for column B, D, and E. So we know that's true. Okay, so let's unfilter this, clear this out, and let's pull another example. Let's go down to this one. Let's filter on E2680. Okay, we got E2680 in multiple rows. Our first training course is product knowledge, so we're going to filter on product knowledge. Remember the date is 6/15/2023. So as you can see, this formula here works. It's finding the duplicates that we want. Okay, let's clear this form. Okay, this next column here is really the same formula as this. The only thing that we're doing is we're determining if the value that this entire formula returns is greater than 1. If it's greater than 1, that means duplicate exists. So that's why we return a true or a false. So false means that it only has 1. If it's true, it's going to return true when this value here returns something greater than. So that's the first way to find duplicates. Another way is, again, we're going to use this exact same formula in our conditional formatting. So let's go over here. So we're using the exact same format, but we're using with the condition if it returns greater than 1. So what this formula does is it identifies duplicates across columns B, D, and E. Now for each row being evaluated, it checks column B, D, and E for that row. It counts how many total rows in your data range have that exact same combination. And if the count is greater than 1, that means duplicates exist. It returns to true and applies the formula. So in other words, how do we set up conditional formatting? If we go up to the Home tab, Conditional Formatting, I already set it up. I said Manage Rows, and this is the formatting one. We're going to select it and edit. So we want to go over to use a formula to determine which cells to format. So in other words, this formula right here, we'll go through it again. If it's greater than 1, that means it's going to apply this format. So if we select that, I'm going to bold the text, and the fill color is going to be this. So that's why you see this here. So let's cancel out of that. Let's close out of there. So in other words is I selected this entire data range. Control Shift down arrow to the right. So this is the range that Excel is looking into and determine whether or not to format each cell in that range. So how Excel goes about doing this, it's going to go to this first cell here, and it's going to check this range, which is column B, checks whether or not B9, E1838 exists in this range. If it does, then it's going to do the same process with D and E, just like before. Notice that I fixed with the ranges that it's going to look for the value that we want to check for. And we're also fixing the criteria, but we're fixing the column only, and we're keeping the row relative because we want to. This format has to be applied not only across columns, but also for each individual row. So when it comes down to this row here, it's going to change this value that it's checking. It's going to be $B10. And it's so forth with the rest of this. And so as it goes through here, it's going to apply this formula for this cell. Then it's going to come to this cell here, apply the same formula, okay, to determine whether or not this returns greater than 1. If it does, it formats the cell. So in other words, this is why we're getting the formatting for the entire row and not just individual cells. So this blue area means that this row here with the combination of employee ID, training course, and completion date exists multiple times through this data range. And that's why we're getting the formatting across all cells. The third and final way is using a composite key. So what is a composite key? It is a unique identifier made up of combining two elements in a table. So you use a composite key. No single column by itself is unique, but a combination of them is unique. So this is the formula right here, composite key formula. What I'm doing is concatenating individual column, concatenating employee ID with the training curves and the completion rate, and I'm separating it with a pipes symbol here. Okay, so this is our composite key. So what we want to do is we want to see if this unique combination of columns exists somewhere else in this range. If it does, it returns true. And this is the Boolean formula. Okay, over here, that returns true or false. And this is the formula right here that counts the number of duplicates. So in other words, I'm using a COUNTIF statement. Basically, I'm selecting this entire range, which has all the composite keys for all the rows, checking to see if H9, okay, here, exists in this range here. If it's a number beyond 1, that means this exists multiple times. If it doesn't, it returns a false. So hopefully this tutorial gave you an idea how you can find duplicates in your data set using Excel form. So again, I want to thank you for goodbye today. You have a great day. Remember to subscribe, and also please like and share this video.